When it comes to symbols that we use, it can be tied to anything, and some symbols can be multi-layered. So certainly the most obvious would be tied to our main character as well as our story themes. Anything tied to the main character's life, what shows their emotion, their desires, the ghost and the lie. One of my main characters, whenever she was scolded by her mother, she would always start picking at the threads in her skirts or on her shirt sleeves. And even after she cut her mother out of her life, every single time she felt rejected or passed over, Evangeline's fingers are finding a thread somewhere on their clothing. So those little things, I never explain it ever. You see her doing this in a really pivotal moment. And then throughout the story, Evangeline's picking at threads. Our character arc, having an object that it's the same throughout the story, but what you see is your character's relationship to that symbol changing throughout the story. The readers are feeling that before they really recognize it for the symbol that it is. Another way, we can use symbols to show relationships and connections between characters. And so you take a romance, a romantic relationship coming together. Certainly we have little nonverbal moments, like they might hold hands, but is there something, a deeper meaning, a symbol? Does one of the characters leave a candy bar in the car for the other person? And maybe like now, as it is in Wisconsin, it's 100 degrees and will melt, but it's the thought that counts with that gift, especially for those of us who write fantasy, science fiction, historical, cultures, symbols and cultures and world building. One thing about writing fictional fantasy worlds is if you're ever feeling that your world building is falling a little flat, because we have symbols naturally when we're working with real world, but when we're creating our own, the symbol help make that fictional fantasy world very textured. And of course, you can also have symbols that represent your villain or your antagonistic forces. So how are they present on the page without actually being there? I'm not talking about like the villain approaches and then the thunderstorms come, but we were talking about 1984, you have the eye, that you are being watched, or like propaganda posters in a dystopian world. So you don't have the dictator of that world breathing down the main character's neck literally, but passing by propaganda posters that are letting you know they're watching you and you need to behave. That keeps the villain present in the story. So on the next slide, I have an example from my book, my current work in progress, 1883 Milwaukee book titled Newhall. It's a young adult historical horror. And this is a multi-layered symbol in this particular book. And so a ring of keys. In this day and age, keys mean a much different thing than it did almost 150 years ago. In Newhall, my character Annie, she grew up her whole life in this huge, luxurious hotel. She has status because her father was one of the past hoteliers, and she is also one of the hotel's mediums. And so she really has a lot of power and influence, and somebody in the hotel who doesn't like her refers to her as Newhall royalty. So she's got a ring of keys. And in 1883, Victorians really saw keys as symbols of authority, of trust, stewardship, control. And in hotels, keys represented rank. So by Annie having a ring of keys and a master key to the whole hotel, that's the ultimate trust. And the first time my main character, Luce, meets Annie, she's got her ring of keys on her. So that's something that's present. A sensory tidbit at this time period. So this is where your genres or your worlds can really work with your symbols. When people heard keys in 1883, they heard them jingling. They immediately recognized somebody in power. Now, the final layer of the symbol in my book has to do with that relationship dynamic. So these two girls hated each other when they first met. And part of that clash was because Luce is a feral orphan and one of her specialties is lockpicking. So she has been picking locks to get into places in Newhall. And to Annie, that's a huge offense because Annie rightfully earned her keys and her trust. But here's Luce just going where she wants. However, as these two come to terms and they start to grow closer and start to work together, Annie trusts Luce with her key ring about 2/3 of the way through the book. So instead of Annie saying, I trust you, in this moment where the readers have experienced the keys in different places and developed this understanding, when Annie hands that over to Luce, and he's saying, I trust you.